Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year to all of you. Happy New Year to all our viewers, all our followers. We've received so many messages over the Christmas holidays and the New Year's, and it's just not possible for me to respond to everybody individually, but thank you for all the good wishes. Merry Christmas. I hope all of you had a Merry Christmas, and of course, Happy New Year to all of you. Tonight, before we get started, if you take a minute or two to share the live feed so that others who may want to join may be able to do so. This is the 5th of January, we're going to get started on a couple of the topical issues. We've all seen what's been in not only the Thursday agenda, the agenda of the country all day. We've all been seeing what's been happening. We've seen about these issues that are being discussed across all forum. The events in Mocha, we're going to spend a lot of time on that today. But take a minute, share the link with your friends and your family. Thank you to all of you who are joining us on NTN television across Guyana, those who are joining on Facebook from the Facebook page of the Vice President of the PPP or my Facebook page, and those of my friends and colleagues, thank you all for joining. Before we get started, I want to say a couple of things. Mainly, these are important times, and we have to be very careful where we take information from. We have to be very careful what we quote and what we repeat as if it were a fact, because it can have a disastrous effect in the country and in the communities in which we live. It is important that we represent things accurately, that we not try to fan flames and stoke fires and incite persons to behave or to react in a certain way. Now, if we're to start at the very beginning of the issues that have gripped today's headlines, which is Mocha and the removal of the squatters that are there. Now, you have to understand, in law, you have a legal right to occupy land which you own, in which case you are a landowner. And you are referred to in law as a landowner or a title holder. If you are in occupation of land that you do not own and you do not have the right to, you are referred to as a trespasser or a squatter. Understand that there is no derogatory intent meant by the use of those terms. And for persons to make great moment of them would be unjustified. Bear in mind that I am an attorney, and I will use the phrases that I am familiar with. And I don't mean by any stretch of the imagination to be disrespectful to anyone or for anyone to offend anyone, or for anyone to say that I'm referring to them in a pejorative or a negative way. But the principle of it all is, if you do not own land, then you don't have the right to occupy it or to be on the land. I mean, if we take that to its logical conclusion, if it were otherwise, there would be chaos. Persons would occupy wherever they chose. And this wouldn't be limited to land, this would be limited to houses, to farms. You just take over places which you don't own. So that is a reality. Now, bear in mind that if you have a title, the process and procedures that relate to you are very different, as one would expect, as compared to instances where you do not have a title. There are obviously different procedures. And as a matter of law in Guyana, any person who owns land, and they are persons who are trespassers or squatters on that land, is entitled to what is known in law as the self-help remedy, which is to retake possession or to retake their lands for their use and benefit. And that is not unusual to Guyana. That is true everywhere in the Commonwealth, and even otherwise. It is based on the very simple principle that the law allows you to take control to some extent of your rights. Of course, there are restrictions. You can't go and breach the peace, and you can't go and harm persons in the process of what you're doing. There are all these accepted restrictions. But the right to self-help exists. Now, let us start with, so I've given you the general principles. Now let's speak about the events of Mocha. In January 2021, the Central Housing and Planning Authority commenced negotiations with all persons along the proposed route and path of the highway that is expected to go to ease traffic congestion up the East Bank. Those of you who live on the East Bank, and there are about 15,000 households in Diamond. Well, no, that was what it started at. It's now closer, I believe it's closer to 27,000 now. Providence is substantially expanded to several thousand households. There's Windsor Estates, several thousand households, several hundred households in Windsor Estate. But there's the whole area. There is the area in Providence, where is the NABI scheme, the Richmondville. There are all those areas. Then there are the areas behind them. So easily, they have been 30, 40,000 households in that area over the past probably decade or a little bit more. And anybody who lives there, I live on the East Bank as well, would know that traffic and traffic congestion is a real issue. At its worst, it can take you an hour to get home. And the reason is there's only one road. There's one road to go to the airport, there's one road to go to the Harbor Bridge, there's one road to come to Georgetown. And even if you don't want to come to Georgetown and you want to bypass Georgetown and go to the East Coast or further, you have to first come through Georgetown. So it creates its own bottleneck. All the traffic has to come to Georgetown and then go out of Georgetown. But it creates the congestion that is so horrific when you are around the courts in Stabroek Market. People don't like to, even during the day, they don't like to drive around in that area. I don't, personally. So the road is necessary. The road was a manifesto promise of the government. President Irfan Ali spoke at length about this in the campaign. He spoke about it at length as soon as he was sworn in as the president, and he's been speaking about it, that infrastructure like this is for the benefit of all of Guyana. The roads are not for one set of people to use, it's for everybody to use. All of the residents of the East Bank will benefit. Everyone who accesses the airport will benefit. This is necessary for Guyana's growth. But beginning in January 2021, this is 2023. So beginning in January 2021, engagements started with everyone on that corridor where there were persons. Now, in some areas, some villages, at the back of some villages, there wasn't occupation. In some, there was less occupation. Some there were heavier occupation. Whatever it was, the conversation between CH&PA, the government, and those persons commenced. That conversation commenced with those persons who were squatting in Mocha. Now the road is being built. You've seen part of the road being built. You've seen parts of the road going on. You've seen the part that goes into, I might be wrong about the areas, Prospect Diamond. You've seen that part. You've seen it stopped. It's not gone any further because there are persons who are living there and they are in the process of relocating them. So there were persons in Mocha, 28 families, 28 households have decided and have long decided to remove. They have been given, the government has assisted them and said, well, we understand you're going to be losing where you live. So they have assisted them in building the structures in which they live, in relocating them to a community, assisting them to build a structure, assisting them in some cases with parcels of farmland, in cases where persons said that's what they were doing. So, but this has been a to and fro going on with the government. And the government has been trying its very best to meet or to have dialogue and to meet with persons in an amicable and friendly environment to find reasonable answers to these issues and resolve these matters amicably in a friendly way. But then there were 7 persons who have continued to hold out and to make demands that are quite frankly unreasonable. Now, that affects every citizen of Guyana. When we allow those in our communities to adopt such an unreasonable position, 2 things happen. One is the growth, the infrastructure growth, the road, which will benefit us all, is held up. So we are all, thousands of people, are deprived of easier access, of spending less time on the roads, of getting home to their families quicker in the evening, because 7 people don't want to leave land that they do not own. Now, a lot can be said about that, but that is the fact. Now, the other side of the coin, when demands are made for compensation, which the government pays, that money which is paid is really taxpayers' money being paid. So all of us, the citizens of this country, are being made to pay for that. And being made to pay for it in a manner where we can use those resources for other things. So there has to be a limit at which any government, any reasonable government will say, you know, your demands are too exorbitant and we cannot accommodate those demands. For persons to allege that they want 100 million, several persons, it was published published across the newspapers, it was published on social media, it was published on various news sites. The cost of what was being asked for is ridiculous. We have one person, I don't want to mention names, whose valuation amount of their property is 7.2 million, and they're demanding 100 million and they want to remain in the same area. Another person whose property valuation is 8.6 million wants 100 million as well. Another person whose valuation is 6 million wants 100 million as well. Another person with a valuation of 5.5 million wants 150 million. There is a person who signed a settlement agreement and valuation of the property is 14 million, is demanding 45 million and farmlands. Another person is 3.5 million. They received the 3.5, they now want another 100 million. It can't be, and we mustn't be clouded to say that persons, it's their livelihood and it's their houses. Everybody's house is valuable to them. Everybody's house is important. But the demands of compensation must be within reason. And if there are valuations done, that's the value of your asset. And you should get fair and reasonable compensation. The government has gone beyond that. The government has been saying, look, we will not only do that, we will build the houses for you. So that's at the government cost. And you will have a house, you will have your compensation, and in some cases you will also have farmland. So you would be in a better position economically than where you were then. But you got to understand, in the first place, you occupied and erected your structures on land that you didn't own and don't have the right to. But the government has said, look, this is what happens. And persons, 28 persons in that same area found that the compensation was reasonable. So 7 persons don't want to do that. 2 years have passed while this back and forth is going on, while the road is not being built, while persons are making more and more demands, and they're being fueled by politicians who think it's in their interest to do this. But politicians have a duty and an obligation to the country as a whole, to not make demands that are ridiculous and to not misguide people. You have to understand, even in where there is the gas pipeline, there are persons whose property the gas pipeline will run through. And in those cases, many of it, the properties are privately owned. People have title and transport. And there is compulsory acquisition going on. Eminent domain has existed since the 1600s. Countries that have development, because you see how countries develop, when you're now developing, people might occupy places or even own places where roads are not, where facilities are not, but as you get more resources, you want to put in more infrastructure. And for the betterment of the country, you need roads, especially, and water, and you need to be able to use access points. In Region 3, it's for the pipeline, for the benefit of the country. We need a power station that pipeline will go to a power station for cheaper energy. This road will be for easier access, quicker and better access. Not to mention, when you put the road, it will open all the lands around it for development, for housing, for industrial, for manufacturing, for commercial. This is how countries will develop. But 7 people are insisting. And for 2 years this has been going on. So, ladies and gentlemen, the reality is the government will always have a legal right. It is called eminent domain in some countries. It is called compulsory acquisition, as it is in Guyana. It has various names across the planet. But this system whereby a country or a government will take for public use private property and displace private citizens is well known. It is how development takes place. There are laws in Guyana that says, and the Constitution provides, that if you have property that you're losing, you should get fair compensation. Now, many of you may not know, I was of course not around at the time, not born that is, but the highway to Linden, for example, involved taking of land throughout Soesdijk and all the way through on the sand, all the way to Linden. Before, Linden was accessed by getting on a boat, I believe at Parika, and you sailed to Wisma. There was no road. That highway, the Linden Highway, when it was built, involved passing through a lot of private land. A famous Guyanese case that went to the Privy Council was John Doe and the Attorney General. And that case was about compulsorily acquiring the man's land. John Doe, Olive Casey John Doe, a lady, she owned the land and it was compulsorily acquired by the government. Now, what happened under the Burnham administration is they paid compensation and said you couldn't question it in the court. We valued your land at X and you have to take that as compensation. No negotiation, no nothing. The courts have said that the compensation must be fair compensation. And if you're not satisfied, you can go to a judge and say, look, these are the valuations and these are the numbers, and the judge will make an order. We know that opposite on Water Street, where there is the Vendors Arcade now, it was land previously owned by Tulsi Prasad, and that was compulsorily acquired, and compensation was paid for that land. But the compulsory acquisition that was done in an effort for that land, Tulsi Prasad didn't agree, so they went to a judge and they said, well, look, these are the valuations of what we could do, and these are the valuations that we would like, and the government didn't pay a fair price or wasn't offering a fair price. The court made an adjudication and the government paid. So this is not unusual. This has been going on, and people are quick to point out that, about make insinuations about race and it only favors one people, but that's not true. That is not true. Along the East Bank corridor, all the persons that had to move were all the persons who were living there in the path of the highway. It didn't matter their ethnicity. The same is true for the compensation on the gas to shore pipeline. Compulsory acquisition is happening to all the land in the pathway. It's not about what race you are or what ethnicity. That's irrelevant. These are national development projects for the benefit of us all, of the entire country. And we have to realize that in the current climate, where the government is saying to you, look, we recognize you have a house here. We're going to give you a house. We're going to give you compensation. And for persons that had farms or were doing some sort, you should have farmlands. So the government has been trying to offer that, and they're still prepared to offer that. Today, His Excellency the President made a public speech on social media, and he said, this is still what the government is willing to do. But we cannot stop. We cannot continue to wait while people vacillate about their demands. It has come to a head after 2 years. 2 years is a long time. And it's eminently reasonable that over 2 years, if there is a continuous and there is an impasse, then that's what it is. There can be no doubt about the importance of this highway to Guyana. No one can realistically doubt the importance of this highway to Guyana. No one can realistically insinuate or suggest that on Guyana's growth trajectory, this is not an absolutely important cog in Guyana's development. Transportation, better roads, better transportation, shorter transportation time. No one can doubt that. And this is for the benefit of all of Guyana. But this must be seen in the context. Now, I don't want tonight to complicate too much of what I'm saying and relate it to the legal rights and principles, because I could do that very easily. Legally, the government is entitled to eminent domain, compulsory acquisition of movable and immovable property as required. The law recognizes you can compulsory acquire and take control of boats, of cars if necessary. That has happened. That happened during the Second World War. The British government needed boats, and that's what they did. So they can take vehicles. They can take control of movable and immovable assets if needed for the public good. And they must demonstrate that it is for the public good. But once they've done that, it is a matter of compensation. You cannot stop it. As a matter of law, you cannot resist the argument of compulsory acquisition or eminent domain. You cannot. All that you can question and seek redress in a court for is compensation. So if they're going to take your land, if the government anywhere is going to take your land, you can haggle about compensation. And if you're not happy with the amount offered, you can go to the court and try to persuade a judge that your number is right as opposed to the government's number. But you still have to vacate the land. So insisting that you are to remain there is just untenable. And I don't want to bog us down too much in the legal principles that are applicable. Because we saw in the newspapers today, and we've seen on social media, and we've seen repeatedly, notices are served, final notices are served, notices are given. If you do not remove by this date, we will demolish. We will move you. The government has these rights, and they have been exercising it in a manner to be as patient as they can with it, so that they can get persons who want to remove items out of their home to do so. Now, I saw some of the live social media feeds, which, I mean, there was a lot of vulgarity, but that was there. But you hear the commentators of the opposition saying that the people want a chance to get their things across a bridge, and they want a chance to remove their goods. There was 2 years, sir. There was 2 years for this to be done. Now, I'm not saying, don't take it that I'm not saying that you can't be reasonable and allow people at the last minute to remove things. But you have to have evinced an intention that you are cooperating with what is going on. You can't blame and abuse members of the police force for doing their job. They are simply enforcing the law. This law, which existed, was used from the time of independence by Burnham to take properties in Turkine, from Jainarine Singh, from Brian James, from other persons. Saijan Plaza was taken by eminent domain. Their properties on Lamaha Street that was taken as by that. There were properties on the wharf that were taken that way. There were properties belonging to Tulsi Prasad that were taken in Linden along that way. The government has taken properties for its own use. It was done it is being done by governments all the time. When a road has to be built, if you look it up, feel free to Google it. Eminent domain, I'm sure you're going to find that the most common use worldwide where governments are taking assets or taking control of assets relates to roads. Where people are along the path of roadways, they have to be compensated, but they cannot stop the roads from going. The roads will benefit an entire nation. And I understand, don't get me wrong, I understand the emotions that are involved with someone who is reluctant to go, who is emotionally attached to their premises and they don't want to leave. But we gotta live in the real world. We can't be overly emotional in situations to say that today they went and the government was there and I was listening to the broadcast and the thing was they were there with an excavator, they were knocking down a house, they were removing all of the things, they were knocking down the buildings. And why did they have to do that today? Well, if not today, when? This is respectfully. It has to be done. It will come to a head. Notice after notice after notice is given. Negotiation after negotiation is given. You're not happy with the compensation being offered, go to the courts. Chase your compensation. Fight as hard as you must. And fight for the best price that you think you can get. But 28 of your villagers, of the people who lived around you, thought this was compensation that was acceptable. So that's going to be a challenge in itself as a matter of law to show that you had special above and beyond needs. The law doesn't work that way. You can't, your special and unique circumstances don't entitle you to different treatment. That's not the way it works. But if you're not happy, go. By all means, go. Seek your compensation. But it is not the right approach to take, to refuse to do anything and to stop a public project for the benefit of a nation from taking place. The sentimentalities, the emotional, the law provides for compensation. With progress, this particular event is most unfortunate. But I would say that with our forward trajectory that is anticipated, the events whereby squatters on government land are going to be relocated and or removed so that public infrastructure projects can take place is going to be more frequent. Now that is because we are now in a position to develop properly our lands and our areas and our communities. So the ones that the government areas and reserves that were there, they're now going to be needed because they now have to provide for the communities in which they are. So this is going to be a problem that's not going to stop. This is a problem, this is an issue rather, that's going to continue because that's what will be the price of development. There's going to be, I am sure, similar conversations and considerations with the bridge, the Demerara Harbor Bridge, and the lands in the area. I don't know if there are private lands or people are living in the path, but there might be. There are going to be issues when we decide to do roads into the through developed areas when we get to areas like Berbice. These are things that are going to happen. In and around Georgetown and Region 3 and probably Region 6, where there's greater population density, it might be more common because obviously there are more projects that will be happening there. But it's going to happen. And we have to accept that the government could have allowed persons to occupy these lands before because they weren't in urgent need and use. But now the government has a program of development. President Irfan Ali has said repeatedly he wants to do 50,000 house lots. He wants to do the roads. He wants to do a bridge. He wants to do a bridge in quarantine. He wants to do infrastructure for the gas energy project. He wants industrial development, manufacturing development. These are going to be issues. And we have to be mature as a people to recognize that this is the government's land all along. And the fact that they would have allowed some people to be there or turned a blind eye to persons who were in occupation, that might be part of it. But at the same time, the government requires the land for development. And we can't stand in the way of the government doing that. And it is not fair to our fellow citizens to adopt a stance and to adopt an approach that hinders development to such an extent and to make demands of people that are really very unfortunate that they would do that. Very, very unfortunate that persons would make such demands. And it is worse, it is most reprehensible that politicians in the opposition will take this as the opportunity to make their stand, to preach about what should be fair and what should happen and how the government should act. They have no moral ground to stand on in this regard. The government has acted above and beyond in terms of what compensation is being offered, what services are being offered, what facilities are being given. These 7 persons just don't want to engage with reasonable conversations because you could see from the demands that that's it. Now, we need to also guard, as I say every week when I'm on, I say to you, we have to be careful about where we get the information. You hear the opposition and the live streaming, and they stoke the fire. This is now their modus operandi. They stoke the fire by asking utterly reprehensible and downright stupid questions, and make insinuations without any foundation or basis. Totally irresponsible, and there must be something wrong with persons who choose such a path. And they make these insinuations that this doesn't happen in other areas, and this only happens in certain areas. I challenge any one of them to find an area where they have been, government has gone and tried to reach a consensus and not achieve the consensus. And in those areas where there is no consensus, whether the government went ahead and did what it had to do and removed persons. Now, I challenge any one of them. They like these little innuendos. They like these little insinuations of total nonsense. But they have nothing to back it up. And this is why I said at the beginning, we have to be careful about our sources. And we have to guard against people whose only agenda is race, strife, discord. They have no solution. They have nothing good to say. Only stoke fires and push people in front to do their dirty deeds, to incite persons to do things. That ladies and gentlemen, let us not go down that road. Let us not fall prey to that. We have to see things for what they are. This is a national project. The government has done so much to make persons better off by moving. It came to a head today. They don't want to move. The government has no choice. The national agenda must go on. That is the truth. The truth is we got to have better roads. We got to have better facilities. And this must happen. And this is the only way that this will happen. And for those who are opportunistically only seeing through blinkered eyes, then you really are blind. And I challenge them to point on any situation where the government requires land for public purposes and stopped a public project when persons refuse to do it. I challenge them to find one instance of that for me. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost up on program time, but you know I can't resist the other news of today. So, Ms. Valda Lawrence and today Ms. Valda Lawrence and the Commission of Inquiry was today. So there were the two persons who thought that it was imperative that the world know that Mr. Mingo's count was correct in 2020. And they found it necessary to sign those declarations. Mingo's bingo numbers 1 and 2. Valda Lawrence signed 1 and Carol Joseph is the other person. So the ongoing Commission of Inquiry invited these good ladies of perfect penmanship to say to the Commission anything they would wish to say and to give the evidence of whatever it is they wish to give evidence about, and perhaps give some insight as to why it was necessary that their excellent penmanship be recorded in infamy in Guyana on those declarations. And they both declined to say anything. They said they pleaded the fifth, they had the right to remain silent. We can't quarrel with that. As with all democratic countries, you have the right to remain silent because anything you say under oath, especially in an inquiry like of that nature, if it is untrue, it is perjury. And the other part about it is, anything you say, as the saying goes, can and will be used against you in a court of law. So if what you say discloses that you have committed a criminal offense or engaged in a criminal act or conspired with others to engage in a criminal act, then you would have the right to remain silent, presumably. Now, you would have the right to remain silent at any tribunal. But we have to be aware that this is the most significant event that has happened in Guyana's electoral history. And for many reasons. And all of the persons involved would surely want to set the record straight about what happened, what their role or involvement was. These two goodly women decided that they did not want to explain it, which they're entitled to do. And they didn't. But it's a shame. It really is a shame that they did not choose to give evidence. Be that as it may, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining. I do hope all of you have had a restful holiday season, an enjoyable one, and you're having a good new year and you've got your plans organized for this year. And I want you to encourage you that one of the things you should have on your plan and your list of agenda is to keep an eye out for local government elections. As you would have seen late last year, there was a postponement. Those were procedural matters, and a new date will be fixed shortly and will be coming. And I want you all to go through the process of making sure your registrations are in order, making sure you know where you have to vote, making sure that you assist comrades wherever necessary, and get prepared. Don't take it off your radar. It's still there. And as always, thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me tonight, whether you have done so from on social media, on Facebook, or you're doing so on television, whether you're doing it from Guyana or for overseas. Wherever you are, I hope you had a pleasant evening, and I hope the rest of your evening is good. And as always, be safe, and may your God be with you. Good night.